Chapter 3. He was sitting on the flat stone that had served as his doorstep, waiting for his supper to cook. The late sun slanted in long yellow bars across the clearing. The forest beyond was already in shadow. Matt was feeling well pleased with his day. The morning he had shot a rabbit. He had skinned it carefully, stretching the fur across the cabin wall to dry. Chunks of the meat were boiling now in the kettle fire over the fire, and good smell came through the door and made his mouth water. In the dimness of the trees, a darker shadow moved. This time it didn't disappear, but came steadily nearer. He couldn't hear the crackle of twigs under heavy boots. Matt leapt to his feet. "Pa!" No answer. It wasn't his father, of course. It couldn't be. An Indian? Matt felt a curl of alarm against his backbone. He stood waiting, for his muscles tensed. The man who came tramping out of the forest trees was not an Indian. He was a heavy set, a fat bulging under his ragged blue army coat. His face was almost invisible behind the tangle of reddish whiskers. Halfway across the clearing, he stopped. "Howdy," he called cheerfully. "Hello," Matt answered uncertainly. Was this someone you thought to be greeted like a deacon? The stranger came closer, so that Matt could see the small blue eyes that glittered in the weather-hardened face. The man stood, deliberately taking his time, looking over his cabin in the cornfield. "Nice place you got here." Matt said nothing. The man peered curiously over Matt's shoulder. Through the open door, he could easily see that the cabin was empty. "You all alone here?" Matt hesitated. "My father is away just now." "Be back soon, will he?" Matt was puzzled by his own unwillingness to answer. He ought to be glad to see anyone after all these days alone, but somehow he wasn't. He didn't quite know why he found himself lying. "Any time now," he said. He went back to the river to get supplies. He might be back tonight. When I saw you coming, I thought it was him. Guess I surprised you. Reckon you don't get much company way off here." "No, we don't," Matt answered. "Then your pappy wouldn't want you to turn away a visitor, would he?" the man asked. "Though, thought maybe you'd ask me to stay for supper. I got a whiff of it half a mile off." Matt remembered his manners. The man's easy grin was beginning to wipe away some of his doubts. "Of course," he said. "Come in, sir." The man snorted. "Ben's the name," he said. "You may have heard of me in the river town." "We didn't stay in the town very long," Matt answered. He hurried now to light a candle. The stranger stood inside the door, taking in every inch of the small room. "Your pappy knows how to build a good house, tight house," he said. "You reckon on staying here for good?" "It's our land," Matt told him. In the candlelight room looked snug and homey. "Something to be proud of, showing off to a stranger. My mother and sister will be coming soon." "More folks come in all the time," the man said. Time was you could tramp for a month and never see a chimney. Now the towns is spreading out from the river every which way. His eye fell on the rifle hanging over the door. He let out a slow, admiring whistle and walked over to run his hand along the stock. "Mighty fine piece," he said. "Worth a passel of beaver. My father wouldn't sell it," Matt said shortly. He was busying himself now to make his stranger welcome. He scooped out a good measure of flour, stirred in some water, patted the dough out on a clean ash board, and propped it up in front of the fire to bake. He laid out 2 bowls on the table and the 2 pewter spoons. He poured molasses into one pewter dish. Then he ladled the hot stew into the bowls. The way that stew disappeared, the stranger couldn't have eaten a meal for a good while. Matt took a very small share for himself. He pulled back his hand and watched the man snatch the last bit of corn cake, sopping up the last of the molasses with it. Finally, Ben pushed back his stool and drew the back of his hand across his beard.